And that class is why the Zorgax Imperium's defeat at the Battle of Nebula X9 was an inevitable conclusion to their ill-conceived campaign. Professor Varnock concluded, his tentacles waving with academic fervor. The holographic display behind him flickered off, leaving the classroom in a state of stunned silence. Well, almost silence. There was a distinct sound of, was that snoring? The Galactic War Tactics professor's compound eyes swiveled, focusing on the source of the offending noise. There in the back row sat the only human in the class, Ethan Carter, transfer student from that backwater demise world, Earth. His head was tilted back, mouth agape, and a thin line of drool was making its way down his chin. Professor Varnock's exoskeleton flushed a deep shade of indignant purple. "Mr. Thompson," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the classroom's perfect acoustics. Jake jerked awake, his eyes wide and unfocused. "The answer is 42, he blurted out, earning a few chittering laughs from his alien classmates. "This isn't your primitive Earth mathematics, Mr. Thompson," Zilnox said, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is advanced galactic war tactics, a subject I would think even a demise worlder like yourself would find engaging." Jake blinked a few times, wiping the drool from his chin with the back of his hand. "Oh, right. Sorry, Professor Late Night Studying and all that. You were saying something about the Battle of Nebula X9. Professor Varnock's tentacles writhed in frustration. "Yes, Mr. Thompson. The Battle of Nebula X9. Perhaps you'd like to share your unique perspective on the matter, since you clearly found my lecture so riveting." Jake stood up, stretching lazily. The other students instinctively leaned away, still not used to the casual way the human moved his surprisingly flexible limbs. "Well, if you insist," he said with a grin that showed far too many teeth for the comfort of his classmates. He made his way to the front of the class, each step echoing in the now silent room. As he passed the first row of desks, a Florvian student with delicate petal-like appendages visibly wilted. "So the Battle of Nebula X9, Jake began, leaning against the professor's desk with a casualness that made Zilnox's exoskeleton itch. "Let me guess, the Zorgax Imperium tried to flank the Galactic Alliance forces by using the nebula's radiation to mask their approach?" Professor Varnock blinked in surprise. "Well, yes, that's correct." Jake nodded, a mischievous glint in his eye. "And I bet they used their fancy-schmancy quantum entanglement communicators to coordinate the assault, thinking the nebula's interference wouldn't affect them." "That's also correct," Zilnox admitted, his tentacles twitching nervously. "And let me take a wild guess here," Jake continued, now pacing back and forth in front of the class, his hands gesticulating wildly. "The Alliance forces, being the clever little space squids they are, figured out a way to disrupt those quantum comms, leaving the Zorgax fleet flying blind and uncoordinated." The professor's mouth gaped open, a feat considering his species didn't technically have a jaw. "How did you—" Jake waved dismissively. "Oh, come on, Prof, it's textbook stuff. Well, maybe not your textbooks, but definitely ours. We humans have been dreaming up scenarios like this for centuries. Heck, I'm pretty sure I saw this exact battle in a video game once." The class erupted in a cacophony of confused alien noises. A Trilxian student raised all three of its appendages. "What's a video game?" it asked, its crystalline body reflecting the classroom's lights in a dazzling display. Jake's eyes lit up. "Oh man, you guys are in for a treat. Video games are like interactive war simulations, but fun. We've been using them to explore tactical scenarios since before we even left our planet." Professor Varnock, having regained some of his composure, interjected, Mr. Thompson, surely you're not suggesting that your species' primitive entertainment could possibly compare to millennia of actual galactic warfare? Jake shrugged, a motion that sent ripples of unease through the class. Shrugging, after all, was disturbingly similar to the challenge display of the carnivorous Shrook beasts of Gamma Persei 8. All I'm saying is, we've been preparing for this stuff long before we knew there was anyone else out there to fight, Jake said. Heck, half our entertainment is about war. Movies, books, games, you name it. We've probably imagined fighting it. A Voltrex student, its gelatinous body quivering with a mix of fear and curiosity, spoke up. But why? If your species hadn't encountered alien life, why prepare for interstellar conflict? Jake laughed, a sound that made several students instinctively activate their defense mechanisms. The Voltrex student accidentally released a cloud of paralytic spores, causing the two nearest students to freeze in place. Sorry about that, Jake said, still chuckling, as he helped the paralyzed students into more comfortable positions. It's just, well, we humans have always been paranoid, I guess. We figured if we ever did meet aliens, they might not be friendly, so we prepared for the worst and hoped for the best. Professor Varnock, who had been watching this display with a mix of horror and fascination, finally found his voice. Mr. Thompson, are you saying that your species has been actively preparing for galactic warfare since before you achieved interstellar travel? Jake nodded, his grin widening. Oh yeah, we've got contingency plans for everything. Alien invasions, first contact gone wrong, time travel paradoxes, you name it. Some human somewhere has thought about how to fight it. The class fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the occasional nervous twitch of an appendage or the soft whirring of a student's internal cooling system working overtime. But that's insane, Professor Varnock sputtered. The resources, the time, the sheer paranoia required to prepare for conflicts that might never happen. Jake shrugged again, causing another wave of unease to ripple through the class. Maybe. But look at it this way. When we finally did make it to the stars, we were ready for anything. And I mean anything. He turned to address the class directly, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made even the bravest students shrink back. You want to know why humans are so good at galactic war tactics? It's because we've been fighting imaginary wars for our entire history. We've explored every possible scenario, every tactical option, every wild what-if you could think of, and we did it all for fun. A Xyrillian student, its bioluminescent skin flashing in patterns of distress, raised a tentative pseudopod. But that's not how war tactics are supposed to be developed. There are established protocols, centuries of real-world data to analyze. Jake laughed again, softer this time, but no less unsettling to his alien classmates. Yeah, and that's why the Zorgax Imperium lost at Nebula X9. They were following the established protocols. The Alliance forces? They were using tactics straight out of Ender's Game. Professor Varnock's tentacles writhed in confusion. Ender's Game? Is this another one of your human war simulations? Close, Jake said with a wink. It's a book, a story about kids being trained to fight an interstellar war through what they think are just games. Sound familiar? The implications of this statement slowly sank in, causing a wave of murmurs to sweep through the class. Professor Varnock looked like he was about to molt from sheer stress. Are you saying, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, that your species has been unknowingly training for galactic warfare through entertainment? Jake's grin was almost predatory now. Unknowingly, nah, we knew exactly what we were doing. We just made it fun. The class erupted into chaos. Students were chittering, buzzing, and emitting pheromones of distress in equal measure. Professor Varnock looked like he was seriously considering early retirement. Jake, seemingly oblivious to the pandemonium he had caused, continued. Take the Zorgak strategy, for example, using the nebula to mask your approach. Classic move, but any decent StarCraft player could tell you that's just asking for a cloaked unit ambush. StarCraft? A brave Andromedian student ventured to ask, its gelatinous form rippling with curiosity. Oh man, you guys would love StarCraft, Jake said, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. It's this game where you control entire armies of different alien races, each with their own unique abilities and tactics. You've got to manage resources, build up your forces, and outmaneuver your opponents. It's basically a crash course in interstellar warfare strategy. Professor Zilnix, who had been slowly edging towards the classroom's emergency exit, froze in place. You mean to tell me that humans have been training in multi-species warfare tactics for amusement? Jake nodded enthusiastically. Yep, and not just StarCraft. We've got hundreds, maybe thousands of games like that. Civilization, XCOM, Mass Effect, each one exploring different aspects of warfare, diplomacy, and alien encounters. The Trilexian student, its crystalline body now vibrating at a frequency that suggested extreme agitation, spoke up again. But how can you prepare for real warfare through such frivolity? Jake's expression softened slightly. Look, I get it. It sounds crazy. But think about it. Through these games, books, and movies, we've explored countless scenarios. We've put ourselves in the shoes of both the invaders and the defenders. We've grappled with the ethics of war, the consequences of our actions, and the complexities of interspecies conflict, all without firing a single real shot. He paused, looking around the room at his stunned classmates. And you know what? It worked. When we finally made it to the stars and found ourselves in real conflicts, we were ready. Not because we were inherently warlike, but because we had already considered every possibility. Professor Zilnix, who had given up on his escape attempt and was now slumped dejectedly at his desk, raised a trembling tentacle. Mr. Thompson, are you suggesting that your species' approach to galactic war tactics is superior to our established methods? Jake's grin returned, but this time it was tinged with a hint of sympathy. Superior? Nah, I wouldn't say that. Different, sure. Maybe a bit more creative, but that's the thing about humans. We're adaptable. We take what works from everywhere and mash it all together into something new. He turned back to the class, spreading his arms wide in a gesture that made several students flinch. That's why we're here, isn't it? To learn from each other. You guys have got centuries of real interstellar experience. We've got millennia of imagining every possible scenario. Put them together, and who knows what we could come up with. The class fell into a contemplative silence. Even Professor Zilnix seemed to be considering Jake's words, his tentacles slowly uncurling from their stress-induced knots. Jake, apparently satisfied with the chaos he had wrought, started making his way back to his seat. As he passed the front row, he paused, turning back to the professor with a mischievous glint in his eye. Oh, and Prof, next time you want to discuss the Battle of Nebula X9, maybe we could set up a little war game. I bet the class would learn a lot more by actually playing out the scenario. But before Professor Zilnix could respond, the bell rang, signaling the end of the class. The students, still in various states of shock and confusion, began to file out of the room, though many of them gave Jake a wide berth as they passed, eyeing him with a mixture of fear and newfound respect. As Jake reached the door, he turned back one last time. "Great class, Profe. Really eye-opening stuff. Oh, and if anyone's interested in learning more about human war tactics, I'm hosting a risk night in my dorm later. It's this old Earth game about global domination. Should be fun." With that, he sauntered out, leaving behind a classroom full of stunned aliens and one very overwhelmed professor. As the last of the students trickled out, Professor Zilnix found himself alone in the suddenly too quiet classroom. He slumped back in his chair, all four of his arms dangling limply at his sides. "Galactic warfare as entertainment," he muttered to himself, his voice a mix of disbelief and grudging admiration. What kind of demise world spawns a species like that? He shook his head, his antennae waving listlessly. Then, with a resigned sigh, he reached for his datapad. "Computer," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Search GalacticNet for StarCraft tutorials." As the computer began to process his request, Professor Zilnix couldn't help but chuckle. It was a nervous sound, tinged with equal parts fear and excitement. "Well," he mused, "if you can't beat them." The screen of his datapad lit up, displaying the loading screen of a game that would soon turn his understanding of galactic warfare upside down. As the iconic Terran, Zerg, and Protoss races appeared before him, Professor Zilnix felt a strange mix of trepidation and curiosity. "What have I gotten myself into?" he wondered aloud. But as the game's epic soundtrack began to play, he found himself leaning forward, his multiple eyes wide with interest. Maybe, just maybe, these humans were onto something after all. Meanwhile, in the crowded hallway outside the classroom, Ethan Carter was surrounded by a group of his alien classmates. Their initial fears seemed to have given way to a burning curiosity. "So, Jake," the Voltrek student burbled, its gelatinous form quivering with excitement, "tell us more about these video games of yours. Are they really as comprehensive as you claim?" Jake's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Oh man, where do I even start? We've got games covering everything from ancient Earth battles to futuristic space operas. Want to learn about resource management in a war economy? Play some Command Conquer. Interested in the psychological impact of prolonged space conflict? Mass Effect has got you covered." The Trilexian student, its crystalline body refracting the hallway lights in a dazzling display, chimed in. "But how can such entertainment truly prepare one for the horrors of actual warfare?" Jake's expression sobered slightly. "That's a fair question. Look, we're not saying video games are a perfect substitute for real combat experience, but they do something just as valuable. They get you thinking. They put you in impossible situations and force you to find creative solutions." He paused, looking around at the circle of alien faces, each displaying their species' equivalent of rapt attention. Plus, they help us explore the ethical dilemmas of war in a safe environment. In games like Spec Ops, The Line, or This War of Mine, you're forced to confront the real human cost of conflict. It's not just about winning. It's about understanding the consequences of your actions. The Andromedan student, its form rippling with curiosity, spoke up. "But surely your leaders don't base actual military strategy on these games." Jake laughed, a sound that still made some of his classmates flinch slightly. "Not directly, no, but you'd be surprised how many of our military simulations have their roots in commercial gaming. Heck, the US Army even developed its own video game as a recruitment tool." This revelation sent a wave of murmurs through the group. The idea of using entertainment as a military recruitment tool seemed to both fascinate and horrify them in equal measure. But it's not just about military applications, Jake continued, warming to his subject. These games, along with our books and movies about space and aliens, they've shaped our entire perspective on interstellar relations. He grinned, an expression that still made some of his alien classmates nervous. Think about it. When we humans finally made it to the stars, we weren't just ready for war. We were ready for peace, too. We'd explored countless first contact scenarios in our fiction. We'd imagined peaceful alien races and hostile ones, incomprehensible cosmic entities, and potential alien allies. The Florvian student, its petal-like appendages quivering slightly, spoke up. But how can you prepare for the reality of alien life through mere stories? Jake's grin softened into a more thoughtful expression. It's not about perfect preparation. It's about cultivating a mindset of adaptability and open-mindedness. When we met our first alien species, we weren't paralyzed by shock or fear. We had a framework for understanding built from centuries of imagining this very moment. He paused, looking around at the diverse group of alien students surrounding him. Each one was so different, so wonderfully alien. Yet here they all were, gathered together in the pursuit of knowledge. And you know what? Jake continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I think that's why we've managed to integrate into galactic society so well. We came pre-equipped, with an understanding that the universe is vast, diverse, and full of surprises. Our fiction taught us to expect the unexpected. The Xyrillian student, its bioluminescent skin pulsing with patterns of intrigue, raised a pseudopod. But surely this fixation on conflict and warfare must have had negative effects on your species' development. Jake nodded, acknowledging the point. You're not wrong. Our history is full of conflict. And yeah, our obsession with war games and battle simulations isn't always healthy. But it's also pushed us to innovate, to problem solve, to think outside the box. He gestured expansively, nearly causing a passing Rixthal to leap out of its exoskeleton in surprise. Take space exploration, for instance. You know what one of the biggest drivers of our early space program was? The Cold War. A period of intense military rivalry between two of our planet's superpowers. They were competing to see who could get to space first, who could reach the moon. And yeah, a lot of that was about military superiority. But look where it got us. The alien students exchanged glances, their various appendages and sensory organs conveying a mix of surprise and grudging admiration. So you're saying? The Voltrek student burbled, its gelatinous form rippling with excitement, that your species turned warfare into a force for progress? Jake laughed, shaking his head. Not exactly. More like we channeled our competitive instincts into something bigger than just fighting each other. We started looking outward to the stars. And once we did that, well, petty squabbles over Earth's resources started to seem pretty insignificant. The Trill. Kayan student's crystalline body sparkled as it processed this information. Fascinating. So your entertainment not only prepared you for potential conflicts, but also drove your technological advancement. Bingo, Jake said, snapping his fingers and causing several nearby aliens to jump in surprise. Sorry, force of habit, he added sheepishly. But yeah, you've got it. Our sci-fi writers imagined faster-than-light travel, and our scientists and engineers worked to make it a reality. We dreamed up advanced AI in our stories, and now we're working alongside synthetic life forms in real life. He paused, his expression growing more serious. "And you know what? I think that's why the Galactic Council was so quick to accept us into the fold. Despite our reputation as Deathworlders, we may come from a harsh planet. We may have a history of conflict, but we also bring with us an unparalleled ability to imagine, to dream, to think up solutions to problems that haven't even happened yet." The alien students were silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. It was the Andromedian who finally broke the silence, its gelatinous form rippling with what seemed to be amusement. "So, Jake," it said, its voice bubbling with suppressed laughter, "what you're essentially saying is that your species turned galactic warfare into a game." Jake's face split into a wide grin. "Well, when you put it like that, yeah, I guess we did. But hey, if you're going to prepare for something as serious as interstellar conflict, why not make it fun, right?" The hallway erupted into a cacophony of alien laughter, each species expressing amusement in its own unique way. The Florvians' petals vibrated rapidly. The Xerillians' bioluminescent patterns danced in dizzying swirls, and the Voltrex actually split into two smaller forms before coalescing back together. As the laughter died down, the Triltian students' crystalline body pulsed with a soft, curious light. "Jake," it said, its voice resonating with genuine interest, "you mentioned hosting a risk night in your dorm. Would it be acceptable for us to join?" Jake's eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled with joy. "Are you kidding? That would be awesome. But fair warning, it might get a little intense. Humans tend to get pretty competitive when it comes to conquering the world." The alien students exchanged glances, a mix of excitement and trepidation evident in their various expressions. "Perhaps," the Voltrex student suggested, its gelatinous form quivering with what might have been nervousness. "We could start with something a bit less conquest-oriented. You mentioned a game called StarCraft?" Jake's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Oh man, you guys are in for a treat. Tell you what, why don't we start with a nice, friendly game of Stellaris? It's all about building your own galactic civilization. You can be peaceful traders, ruthless conquerors, or anything in between. It's a great way to explore different strategies for interstellar relations." The alien students nodded, buzzed, and flickered their agreement. As they started to make plans for their upcoming game night, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Here he was, halfway across the galaxy, teaching a bunch of aliens about human culture through video games. If that wasn't a win for interstellar diplomacy, he didn't know what was. As the group began to disperse, each heading off to their next class, Jake found himself walking alongside the Florvian student. Its petals were gently swaying, indicating what Jake had learned to recognize as a state of deep thought. "You know," the Florvian said, its voice a soft rustle, "I think I'm beginning to understand why your species has adapted so quickly to galactic society. You've been preparing for this your entire history, haven't you?" Jake nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "In a way, yeah. We've been dreaming about the stars, about alien life, about galactic civilizations for as long as we can remember. When we finally got out here, it was like, I don't know, like coming home to a place we'd only ever imagined." The Florvian's petals rippled in what Jake had come to recognize as their equivalent of a smile. "It's quite remarkable, really. Your species turned your fears and anxieties about the unknown into a force for growth and exploration. Instead of being paralyzed by the vastness of the cosmos, you embraced it." "Huh," Jake said, considering the Florvian's words. "I never really thought about it that way. I guess we did, didn't we?" They walked in companionable silence for a moment, the hustle and bustle of the alien academy swirling around them. Jake marveled at the diversity of life forms hurrying to and fro, each with their own unique biology, culture, and way of thinking. And here he was, a human from Earth, walking among them as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Hey," Jake said suddenly, turning to his Florvian companion. "I just had a thought. You know how we humans have all these games and stories about aliens in space?" The Florvian's petals quivered in affirmation. "Well," Jake continued, his eyes lighting up with excitement, "why don't we create some games that incorporate real alien species and cultures? Like, imagine a version of civilization where you could play as a Florvian empire, or a Xerillian federation, or even a mixed society of multiple species. We could use real galactic history as a basis, but allow players to explore alternative outcomes." The Florvian's petals began to vibrate rapidly, a sign of intense interest. That could be fascinating. A way for different species to explore each other's histories and cultures in an interactive format, and perhaps a way for us to better understand your human way of thinking. Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. And it wouldn't just be about warfare or conquest. We could focus on diplomacy, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation. It could be a tool for fostering understanding between different species." As they reached the junction where they would have to part ways, the Florvian turned to Jake, its petals arranged in a pattern that Jake recognized as one of respect and admiration. "You know, Jake," it said, its voice filled with warmth, "when I first heard that a human would be joining our class, I was apprehensive. Your species has quite the reputation, after all." Jake rubbed the back of his neck, a sheepish grin on his face. "Yeah, we tend to make quite an impression." The Florvian's petals rustled in what Jake had learned was their version of laughter. "Indeed. But I'm beginning to see that there's much more to humans than just your Deathworld physiology or your enthusiastic approach to conflict simulation." Its petals shifted, forming a pattern that Jake hadn't seen before. It took him a moment to realize that the Florvian was attempting to mimic a human smile. "You bring a unique perspective to our galactic community," the Florvian continued. "Your ability to imagine, to dream, to think beyond the constraints of what is to what could be. It's quite remarkable. Perhaps that, even more than your physical adaptations, is what truly makes you formidable." Jake felt a warm glow of pride at the Florvian's words. "Thanks," he said, genuinely touched. "That means a lot coming from you. And hey, who knows? Maybe one day we'll be sitting around playing Galactic Civilization, Real Species Edition, and it'll all be thanks to this conversation." The Florvian's petals vibrated in amusement. "I look forward to it, Ethan Carter of Earth. Now I believe we both have classes to attend, until our game night." Jake grinned and gave the Florvian a thumbs up, causing its petals to twitch in surprise at the unfamiliar gesture. "You bet. See you then." As they parted ways, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement about the future. Here he was on an alien world, about to teach a bunch of extraterrestrial students about human culture through the medium of strategy games. And who knew? Maybe this was the beginning of a whole new approach to intergalactic relations. After all, if humans had managed to turn their anxieties about the unknown into a force for innovation and exploration, who was to say they couldn't turn their love of games into a tool for fostering understanding across the galaxy? As Jake hurried off to his next class, his mind was already buzzing with ideas. Galactic monopoly, where you could buy properties on different planets, an interstellar version of diplomacy, where each player represented a different alien species. The possibilities were endless. One thing was for sure. Life in the galactic community was never going to be boring, not if Ethan Carter and his fellow humans had anything to say about it. And somewhere in the vast, star-studded expanse of the cosmos, the universe seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The humans had arrived on the galactic stage, bringing with them their unique blend of imagination, adaptability, and an uncanny ability to turn even the most serious matters into an engaging game. The game of galactic civilization was about to change, and everyone, from the smallest Voltrex to the most ancient Xyrillian, was about to learn that when it came to thinking outside the box, nobody did it quite like the humans. As Jake disappeared around a corner, his enthusiastic voice could be heard fading into the distance. "Hey, has anyone here ever heard of Dungeons and Dragons? No? Oh man, do I have a treat for you guys." The stage was set. The players were gathering, and the greatest game in the history of the galaxy was about to begin. Little did the rest of the galactic community know. They were about to learn the true meaning of the human phrase, "It's not whether you win or lose. It's how you play the game." And humans, they played to win.